Hi everyone and welcome to the DPDP webinar. Today we're going to talk to you about the DPDP Act that is now fully official, that's going live very soon, sooner than many of us expect, right? And it's going to change how we look at customer data, customer interactions forever in India. Now, to talk about that today, I have Varun with me, who's a partner at Luthra and Luthra. Hi, Varun.
Hi, Pranav. It's great to sort of be on this webinar with you. And I'm happy to sort of take this opportunity to let all the people who are participating in this webinar really understand what this DPDP Act is all about. And hopefully, with you, today we will do a deep dive into this act, what it implies, and how one can be compliant within the timelines prescribed by the law. So I'm there to help with all legal aspects of this act.
No, perfect. Thank you so much for that, Varun. Right now, what the DPDP Act is changing for us is that as retailers, we can no longer assume consent or store a customer's data indefinitely, right? Which means that for each and every individual customer, we need to take verifiable consent from them before we're able to do anything else, whether it's marketing, analytics, or any further action, right? And at Xeno, we have a lot of experience dealing with all of this because we've built a customer engagement platform for retailers, from loyalty to marketing automation to offer management, right? But across all of this, customer data is the key. And because we lead that for many retailers, including many of you on the webinar today, we wanted to get together with Luthra and Luthra so that we can help you all across this entire journey, right? We help you with the customer engagement product that we built, but today we wanted to go beyond that to say how can we all win at DPDPA and convert it into a point of trust for us. And we're going to talk about that from two lenses. First, we have Varun to give us the legal perspective so that you can better understand DPDPA from a legal point of view in terms of how to operationalize that, right? But the second part, which is also really critical, is technology, because the way the DPDPA Act has been built, it has been built in a technology first manner, expecting retailers like us to implement technology in the first place, right? So how we can help with that from a technology point of view is also something we're going to be talking about through the webinar. But before we get started, I'll quickly hand it over to Varun to give a quick introduction about Luthra and Luthra.
Right. I think it's really great, Pranav, that we are first talking about what this law really requires, right? And that's why I think it's important for a lawyer like myself to come in and first explain to everyone who's sort of attending today what does the law really expect of them, right? In that sense, the organization that I belong to is Luthra and Luthra. It's a tier one law firm, which means it's one of the largest in the country. There are over 300 lawyers. And we are particularly good at advising a lot of businesses who have started moving towards compliance with this particular law, right? So if we move to the next slide, you'll see some accolades over there. The most important one of which is that the Global Data Review has ranked our firm as one of the elite advisors when it comes to advising on all matters of data privacy. So Pranav mentioned a very important thing. He said, we are all in the business of having our consumers' data, right? My job today is to explain to you how the law expects you to handle that data, how to collect that data, what all you can do with that data, right? And being a lawyer who has advised a significant number of businesses transition and understand about this law and transition into compliance, I would be happy today to really take a step back and tell you about the basics that this law, what are the basics that this law expects from you all to do, right? So if we move to the next slide, right? I want to first and foremost dumb it down and really talk about DPDP in plain English, right? What is DPDP? You would have heard this term being thrown about quite a lot in recent times. A lot of you might already have a lot of prior knowledge about it. A lot of you might have even read the law. A lot of you might have relied on credible and some uncredible news resources. But let me just break down what this law really entails, right? The DPDP stands for Digital Personal Data Protection, right? Digital personal data. Each of these three terms is very important, right? Personal data is basically anything that can be used to identify an individual. Your phone number, your email, your Aadhaar card number, all of these are personal data, right? So the law says that anybody who is taking on or collecting this personal data and storing it in digital form, right? On a computer, on their cell phone, or in any other software, right? Or is taking it in a physical form and then subsequently converting it into a digital form, they need to sit up and pay attention because this law applies to them, right? Now, the government has termed this as a welfare legislation. So what they have done is that they have put all power and control in the hands of the citizens of the country. The citizens whose data is being collected, the government says now they are in charge. They are the ones who will decide how their data is being used, right? And nothing that retailers can do or anyone providing a good or service can do should limit that power of them having complete control over their data. So this law essentially is based on four pillars. If you understand these four pillars, you will understand the entire nitty-gritty of this law without having to get too deep into the legal jargon, right? It essentially sets up a system of consent first, right? It requires businesses to obtain the consent of the customers whose personal data they are collecting. Okay. Now, that consent has to be specific and it has to be for the specific purpose for which that data is being collected. So that consent has to be clear, explicit, and it has to be specific, right? Secondly, once this consent is given, it is not an omnibus consent that here, take my information and use it for whatever you want to. You have to take the consent for a specific purpose. So you have to tell your customer that this is the information, this is the personal data I have taken from you, and I intend to use it for these different purposes. So these two form the essential pillars of this law, right? This law then also gives the customer a lot of right. Once they have given this consent, a lot of right to deal with their information. So they can withdraw their consent. They can ask for you to change the information. They can ask for you to delete their information. They can ask from you what information of me do you have and where all are you sharing it, to who all are you sharing it. All of these consumer rights have been encapsulated into this law. And most importantly, for our purpose today, there is a requirement for automatic deletion of information, right? You cannot indefinitely and forever hold on to the information of your customers. Once the purpose is over, or if the customer has withdrawn their consent, you are supposed to delete it. And we will talk about more about the timelines for that deletion. The typical rule is within 3 years, you are supposed to. But the last thing, that's the most important factor, right? And I would call this the fifth pillar, is that who is responsible for all this compliance? It is not anybody else but the business itself. So they have given all the rights to the consumer whose data is being taken, and all the responsibility for ensuring compliance is with the business, right? And that's where these two terms, which I'm going to introduce now to you, become very important. The person from whom you're taking the information is called the data principal, right? And the person who's taking this information, that is the business or the retailer, is the data fiduciary. Now, the word fiduciary itself will give you a lot of information. It basically means you're holding that information in trust, right? So the law categorizes all of these businesses as data fiduciaries and says, now, you as the data fiduciary, it is your responsibility to ensure compliance with this act. It is not my job, or it is not the job of someone who provides a technical solution like Pranav. It is the business's job to ensure compliance, and the government will catch hold of the businesses when compliance is not in place, and we'll talk about some of the mechanisms in which that happens, right? Can we move to the next slide? This becomes particularly important. This talking about the law becomes particularly important for businesses such as yours who are in a consumer facing role, right? This is what we lawyers like to call a high risk data environment, because there are a lot of personal data touch points that come into play when you are making a sale, whether it's phone, email addresses, whatever, right? And because of you have so many multiple channel touch points, right? It is very important for a business like yours to really do a deep dive and understand, okay, where all am I actually collecting personal data? There might be so many touch points where I'm collecting data and I'm not even aware of it, right? I already talked about how the responsibility is on you, the business, as a data fiduciary. And then the law allows you to hire people to do this job for you, make it easier, provide a technical solution. All of that is allowed. But for lack of a better word, if the government wants a neck to catch on to, it is going to be that of the business, right? The enforcement, as is the case with every new regulator, we envisage the enforcement to be quite active once this law kicks into force 17 months from now. And as is the case, this has happened in the country multiple times when the Competition Commission of India was set up, when Securities Exchange Board was set up. Whenever there is a new regulator, within the first 6 months, they catch hold of businesses to make them an example, and heavy fines are levied so that the regulator flexes their muscles and the industry as a whole gets the message that this law is going to be enforced. In this case, one must remember that enforcement is also easy because it is all about a data trail collection and usage, which is easily identifiable. So it's fact based, it's not subjective. Either you took consent and you followed the law or you didn't. And that's easily traceable and easily evidenced. And so enforcement will be quick and easy, right? At any given point of time, you have to be compliant across every requirement of this law, which starts from getting the consent of your customer for their personal data, and thereafter allowing them the mechanisms for dealing with their personal data, whether it's withdrawal or anything else. And then again, also allowing for them to have a redressal mechanism where if they have any complaints, they can reach out to you. All of this compliance requirement is in your hands and it needs to be done by you, the business. Moving on to the next slide, right? I talked about the essential 4 pillars along with the fifth pillar, which basically made it your responsibility. But the legal foundation is across what you see on your screen right now. There is a consent first requirement now. You cannot use data for anything, upselling, marketing, calling the person for anything, if you don't have his consent first. Secondly, when you do have his consent, it is for a specific purpose. It is not for anything under the sun. An example I often quote is if someone goes to a pharmacy to buy, medicines, and that person gives their phone number for the purposes of receiving the receipt for his purchase onto his phone. It doesn't mean that you can then use their phone number for telemarketing of medicinal services or for upselling any product to him or for any marketing. That person gave their phone number only for the purposes of receiving a receipt for their purchase. You can only use it for that. And that is why a robust consent mechanism where they know exactly what data is given and for what purpose it's going to be used for becomes more important. The third thing is you can't randomly take data which doesn't involve the nature of the goods or services that you are providing. So there is a requirement of data minimization. You're supposed to only take that which is legitimately used for the purpose for which that consent was given and for your particular goods and services, right? All of this process you have to ensure is documented meticulously, because if tomorrow there is a notice from the data protection board to you saying, show me in this instance how consent was taken and how data was used and how you have complied with the law, you need to be able to provide logs. There is also a requirement under the law that once you take this data, even if you have taken it with valid consent and you have specified what purpose it's going to be used for, you have to ensure that it is accurate, especially in cases where if you are going to do anything which might impact the customer. If there is going to be anything that is done with that data that might impact the customer, the requirement for accuracy of that data is also yours. And of course, we talked about this. It is not a one-time interaction with the customer where you take his consent, you tell him the purpose, and then you forget about it. The customer constantly has the right to ask you, what is my information? Where have you used it? I need to withdraw it now. I need you to delete it. All of these things you need to provide and facilitate. And lastly, most importantly, I stress upon this again, if the customer withdraws their consent or if the purpose for which the consent was given is over and there has been no interaction with the customer for a period of time, usually 3 years, then you're supposed to automatically delete the data. And you need to give the customer a little heads up saying that I'm going to delete your data. Do you want us to continue to retain it? Do you want it, we were using it for these purposes, right? But for our purpose, the most important law and principle to be stressed upon here today is that no consent equals no marketing. Maybe move ahead, Pranav. Now, this consent, the government has placed a lot of emphasis on it. They have said that it must be informed, it must be active, it cannot be passive. You cannot send an email to them saying that if you don't respond to this email within 24 hours, we'll assume the consent. No, it has to be explicit and positive, affirmative. It has to be specific. And like I mentioned, it is revocable, but you as the business also have to maintain an audit trail to know, to see where this, how this consent has been given. So that means you're supposed to maintain timestamps, you're supposed to maintain the channel information as to how this consent came about, and you are supposed to be able to reproduce the consent text as and when required. So this consent is heavily regulated. And so that's your first opportunity to get it right. And so a lot of application of mind has to go into that. And this is where I would really like Pranav to come in and really talk about what is the easiest way now, because it's so regulated. What is the easiest way in which I can take this consent? And mind you, there's another thing which I skipped. You have to provide this in multiple different languages. The law says you're supposed to provide this ability to give a consent in every language that is recognized in the constitution of this country. So you have to give them that option as well. But how do we do this simply and make it easily? The law itself understands that the only way that compliance can be achieved is through a technical solution. And maybe Pranav, you're the expert on this front. Maybe you can talk to us and tell us how can a business make this simple, make it easy? What can they do?
Now, perfect. So, like Varun shared, right? For consent, it requires a timestamp, a channel, and a consent text to document exactly what consent the customer has given, where have they given it, and when have they given it. Now, to do that, right, there are different parts to a consent notice and capturing consent from a particular customer, right? So let's look at this sample consent notice for an ABC retailer, right? Now, imagine a jewelry retailer which has to capture more data points for larger, higher value transactions. So first they have to capture consent maybe for the purpose of analytics, for marketing, right? Any other purposes that we can have multiple such purposes. And under each purpose, we are communicating clearly to the customer which data categories are you actually capturing consent for. So which means am I sharing just my name, just my mobile number, maybe just my email ID, right? As a jewelry retailer, I might be required to capture Aadhaar or PAN from a customer. Whatever data points I require, I need to be able to give the customer an option to see exactly what data that they'll be sharing with me, and have an option to give us either partial consent or complete consent, right? So just like you would have seen these cookies on European websites for a long, long time where it says allow all cookies or allow partial cookies. This is the similar comparison to that, where when it comes to my customer data, I can either give full consent or I can give partial consent, right? And of course, the UI of how this consent is captured can be tweaked, but this is just giving you a broad idea, right? Another key thing that's mandated by the law is here you see this language icon, right? So a customer should be able to see this consent notice in many different English languages that are actually mandated by the law, and switch this notice up to a different language in the first place, right? And here you can see we're also giving customers a link that if you have grievances with us, click here. If you want to make a complaint to the data protection board, click here, right? So this is everything that we need to legally entail to cover a consent notice, right? Now I'll talk about how we can take the same consent notice in retail environments in a practical way, right? Now, all of us as retailers, we have a point of sale system at our stores, right? Now there are two ways where we can capture consent at our physical stores. One is the ideal way and the second is the alternative way, right? In the ideal solution, we can have a customer facing screen where the customer can enter their mobile number or their email ID to confirm who they are. On that customer facing screen itself, they can see that they are giving us consent, let's say, to receive personalized offers for marketing communications, whichever are the different purposes that we have and the data categories within those purposes, like we saw on the previous screen. But once a customer has done that, seen all of that themselves, because this is not a screen that's owned by the customer, we still are required to send across an OTP to the customer so that we can truly validate that they are the customer who themselves confirmed this to us, right? And there is no confusion about the consent that they gave us. The alternative system, right, if let's say we find it complicated to put screens at every store, right, is every customer, all of us have a screen in our pocket, right? We all have a mobile phone with a screen with it. So you can literally use the customer screen to capture that consent. Now you could send, when the customer shares across their mobile number at the store, you can send that customer an SMS or a WhatsApp communication with the consent notice. The customer can read through that consent notice on their phone, right? And if they confirm to the entire consent notice and they want to give full consent, they can give you across an OTP. Or if they want to give you partial consent on that same message that we've sent across, we'll need to give them a link through which they can give us partial consent as well as a business, so that we are fully compliant with that entire process. Now, Varun, one of the things that was coming up, which I was discussing with a lot of retailers, right, which I feel like caused a lot of confusion. There were news articles, not lawyers talking about this, but there were news articles, there were conversations in the media that customers can no longer share their mobile number at a store, right? So it'll be great if you can just share a legal perspective on that and on these two solutions to help everybody understand that in a better perspective.
No. Pranav, that's a very important question. And there's a lot of misinformation that's been flowing around, particularly by people who don't really understand the law, as to how it is supposed to be complied with. What does the law say? The law says, just excuse me 1 second, I have something in my throat. The law says you are supposed to, when you take personal information from any consumer, you are supposed to take their consent so that you are able to tell them what are the purposes you're going to use that personal information for. So you take a consent. That's one option. The second option is, if you take information, personal information from a consumer, you need to be able to tell the government how did you take it. You need to be able to evidence that this is how I took it and this is what he consented for it to be used for. If in an oral mechanism, someone is giving their phone number, the only protection then you have under the law is what is called a legitimate use protection, wherein, like the pharmacy example I gave you, when somebody gives their phone number, it can only then be used for the very specific and limited purpose of selling that person that particular goods and service, and thereafter that purpose is over. and you are supposed to delete the information. You can't really use that information for anything else. You can't reach out to them again. You can't market to them. You can't store it in a data and run analytics on that information. So that information, though for that one particular transaction can be categorized as a legitimate use and you will get away with it, but you can't essentially do anything else with that information, right? So when these newspaper media reports start talking about all of this, saying that oh, customers can't give their information orally, what they are essentially trying to say is that that information cannot then be used by the business for any other purpose. And let's not forget, even for that one interaction where I gave the phone number orally, if I use that information, I am still using personal information. How should I prove legitimate use when the government comes? What am I going to do? I'm not going to show them a CCTV footage of my shop and say that, okay, this person had come here, given this phone number. It's very difficult to have an evidentiary trail for an interaction like that. So all of that was condensed into a one-line newspaper bite which said you can't give your phone number orally. The truth of the matter is you could probably do that, but that is not the most efficient and effective way under the law to collect that information and then use it in the future, right? What the law essentially says is you take whatever you want, just take the consent and specify the purpose, and then you can use it. At that point in time, the consumer can also say that, okay, I don't want you to use my phone number, right? And then you can obviously tell them that, okay, I'm using your phone number for the purposes of sending you an invoice. If you don't give me that phone number, then I need some form of servicing the invoice to you. I'll send it on an email, then you give me your email. But that mechanism has to happen where they give their consent for that specific purpose, which cannot happen orally for two reasons, like I mentioned: no evidentiary trail, and secondly, not the most efficient way of collecting the data. I hope that sort of answers the question, Pranav.
No, thanks so much, Varun, for clarifying that, right? So to quickly summarize for everyone, customer can share their details personally, right? I can see somebody has a question. It'll be great if you can write down your question and we'll definitely answer that question, right? So first, you can share across your information verbally, but you cannot capture consent verbally, to clarify, and that is the challenge. The consent has to be done either using one of these two solutions, which is either the customer themselves enter their contact details, gives the consent and then shares the OTP, or you send a communication on the customer's phone which is readable by the customer, which is the consent text, which is verifiable at any future date that you sent that message to that particular customer, and only on reading that message they send you back an OTP, which is giving you a verifiable, transparent trail that the customer gave you consent. So that process change is the biggest change under the entire law and the ecosystem around capturing consent. Yes. I can see some questions coming in which we'll take up in a little bit, right, as on some of the future slides. But to clarify even further, right, the consent that we are taking is has to have a proper audit log trail maintained, right? So for every single consent that we are capturing from a customer, we need to have a consent artifact, right? Which is a permanent proof of the consent that we have received from that particular customer. And that consent artifact is what will save us if on some future date we get an inquiry and we get asked a further question, right? Now, this is the process of capturing the consent in terms of how we can capture it in a store, online. What are the data points we need to capture while taking a consent, and then maintaining a consent artifact on top of that. The next step after this is how we have to manage the data retention and deletion of these consent artifacts, right? And I think I can see certain questions here around data deletion and data expiry. I think Varun is going to give us a much deeper perspective on all of that right now.
Right. This is a very important aspect, Pranav, that you have touched upon. A lot of the people on the webinar today have been in business for a very long time. They have already a lot of consumer data, which is already in a digital form. And we will discuss about what to do with data that is already there with you. What exact steps need to be taken for the data that's already there with you and what to do with your existing customers. But right now, it's important to understand the basic principle that if somebody has purchased something from you and you have not taken their consent but have collected personal information, please don't assume that that act of purchase is equivalent to a consent. Like we have been discussing, that consent has to be active and there has to be an audit log and a trail and all of that, right? A question that came up, which we will address more in detail, is also what is the timeline? How long can I hold on to this data? The law says three things. One is if the customer through a portal says, take down all my information, I don't want you to have it anymore. You have to delete it immediately. If you got their data for a particular purchase, right? And that purpose was for that purchase and that purpose is over, then you're supposed to delete the information because there is no purpose left anymore. Thirdly, is that once you interacted with the customer and the purpose is sort of over, how long can you hold it in your logs and your records? Well, the standard timeline is for about a period of 3 years. There is still some uncertainty in the industry. Some people say that it might be about 1 year from the date on which the purpose is expired, right? And then you can hold it for about a year and then you have to delete it. And like we had already mentioned, it's an automatic deletion. But essentially, right now, for the purposes, understand the timeline is somewhere around 3 years. After that 3 year period, if there has been no interaction with the customer and there has been and the purpose for which it was originally taken is over, assume that after 3 years, you're supposed to delete that information. So that answers the question of how long can I hold on to this information? Now, under the new law, there is a specific timeline, right? It is not to be believed that any interaction can extend the expiry. So we cannot be cheeky here and just call up the customer and say, I'm just calling in to check how you're doing. And then that allows me to get another 3 years to hold on to the information. No, that interaction has to be towards a specific purpose, right? Towards your goods and services. If that happens, then of course, your timeline for holding on to that information extends, right? Your ability to hold on to that information extends, right? We have said this a couple of times now, but you're supposed to automatically delete. But before deleting, 48 hours before, you're supposed to send a communication or a notification or an email to the consumer saying, you had come to us, we had retained this data of yours. Now we have not heard from you for many years, and we want to now proceed to delete this data. If you don't have any objection to that, within 48 hours of this time period expiring, we will delete this data, right? And then you will go ahead and delete it. And that process is also very important because it's a part of your compliance. Deleting is as important as collecting. Okay. And it is very important, and I'll ask Pranav to sort of come back in here. Deleting is as important as collecting. This mechanism of deletion also has to be recorded, and it also has to be done in a way that it doesn't become a compliance nightmare or a burden, because manual deletion, you cannot scale that. You cannot sit and start looking at each customer. There has to be some sort of an automated technical solution to that. And maybe you can talk us through how businesses can do this without too much of a pain.
No, perfect, Varun. Right. And like Varun shared, deletion is as important as collection of consent, right? Again, in the buzzwords, we focus so much right now on the collection of consent, but I feel enough focus has not been given on what needs to happen after we've collected that consent, right? And we'll give you a deeper perspective into all of that, right? So imagine today we have customer data, and that customer data flows across multiple different systems, right? Like we had a question from Sagar that our customer data is going to go to a logistics partner, a loyalty partner. So of course we all use softwares, and our customer data will flow to different softwares further beyond that, right? So now customers are also interacting with these independent softwares. For example, if you're using a loyalty program or marketing automation software from a provider like Xeno, the customer can come and directly opt out on a WhatsApp communication or an email communication saying, I no longer want to receive email communications from your brand. That request then has to flow into the consent management platform, which then has to communicate to every further software to unsubscribe this particular customer from email, to make sure no emails are going out to this particular customer, right? The same way a customer, like Varun shared, has the control where they can say, delete my data, I don't want you to have my data anymore. At this point of time, a request gets created in a consent management portal where we can either automatically do it or have a process to manually review those requests and confirm on those requests. But once we confirm on a deletion request, there is a process where that same customer's contact details could be on 5 different softwares, right? It could be in your loyalty software, your marketing automation software, your feedback management software, uh, right? Maybe in your e-receipt partner software, right? And so on. You have, all of us have so many different softwares, our own internal systems where we're saving that customer's data, right? Like our data warehouses. So that customer's data has to get deleted from all of those systems and they have to be replaced by an anonymous identifier within those systems where we no longer are recording the information of that particular customer across those systems, right? So that entire process has to be conducted. And then the third way this deletion of data gets triggered is by expiry, right? So when it comes to consent expiry, there are 2 parts to that process. The first is 48 hours before we expire a customer's consent, we are required to send them a notice, right, on their phone or their email ID saying that your consent is going to expire, right, in 48 hours, which gives the customer one last opportunity to make an interaction with us to prevent the deletion of that consent, right? 48 hours prior is what is mandated by law. If you want to choose to do so, you can even send more communications, but this is what is mandated by the law, right? But the moment that timeline gets hit, at that moment in time, we are again required to delete that customer's data from all those different systems that we have, and a consent management platform at the center of it all will help us solve for all of that, right? Now, the way that's going to work is in the consent management platform, right? We will have the capability to record all the different systems, right? Like, let's say we have a loyalty system, we have our e-commerce platform, we have a point of sale system, we have our e-receipt system, we have a feedback system, we have a data warehouse system. Now, we don't need to give the actual company's name, but we need to record the names of all of these systems, which then the technology will also connect to in the backdrop. But there is also an opportunity for a customer to come and check, for this purpose, the data categories you took from me, which systems are you actually forwarding that data to, where you don't need to revert with, hey, I forwarded that data to Xeno or to Salesforce. You just need to say, I forwarded that data to my loyalty system or my marketing automation system or my e-commerce platform, right? So whatever is the name of the system here that you see on the screen is what will pass back to the customer, which will be the broad identifier of what this system is for us, right? So all of this has to get recorded very clearly, right? Then again, in the consent management platform, we will have the capability where all these requests that are coming into a particular, from a particular customer to either update their consent, delete their consent, expire their consent, export the information we have about us and get access to that information. All of these requests will be received so that we can return back to a customer, right? And we'll talk about that consent management portal in a little bit, right? I can see more and more questions coming in, right? But along with this, there is also the process where the consent management portal through APIs needs to talk to every system. Now imagine, to make this technology savvy, the world is not yet fully ready for this, but it's getting there. You don't just need to have a consent management portal, but every single one of your systems needs to have the capability that on the basis of an API request, they are able to delete the data and confirm back to you so that you have an official legal confirmation that is recorded for you that they have deleted that particular customer's data, whether it was an expiry request, it was an update request, right, or it was a deletion request from a particular customer, right? So I can see a question here from Abhinav that when data is to be deleted on expiry or when purpose is over, right? Or when a customer asks to delete, does it mean to delete the PII data or all data, such as delete the mobile number and keep the transaction and product purchased, right? But only the mobile number and the transaction is to be deleted, right? So, Varun, it'll be great since we're in this point if you can clarify that.
That's a very good sort of question here, right? The law specifically says delete everything, right? So that period of 3 years is given for you to maintain that data as well as everything associated with that data. So when you delete data, the assumption is that everything associated with that data is also delete going. So you don't need to maintain logs. So this 3 year period, there's a logic behind this. In Indian law, the statutory limitation for any cause of action or for bringing any claim or for bringing any problem to the courts is typically 3 years, right? So basically, the government says if a 3 year period has gone by, neither the customer has reached out to you, nor you have had any problem, and all of this is over and he's withdrawn their consent and whatever. Once this 3 year period is over, delete everything pertaining to that information. That means both the personal information, the actual information, as well as the logs pertaining to that. I hope that clarifies.
Yes. Yeah. So I think just to reiterate, and Jay, you also asked this question. This does not mean you delete the actual invoices which you will
Mhm.
need for financial purposes or your actual transactions. It just means you're anonymizing the customer's details. Amar, I can see you also have a question. It'll be
Just
great if you
if
can.
Pranav, I could clarify one thing. Sorry, maybe I wasn't very clear. I thought the question was particularly only to personal data and the logs of how you collected that data.
Yeah.
Now, see, if you have invoices, anything that you might need for your tax purposes or for your own internal audit purposes, there is a carve out in the law which says that whatever is required for complying with applicable law, so that your audit purposes and everything, that data you can retain. But like Pranav said, it would then need to be anonymized, right? For your audit purposes, you don't need to know the specific customer name. You would need to know, okay, these many invoices were issued, this was the revenue generated. Just to clarify there.
Yes.
There is
And
an
of course,
exception in
there
law.
will be exceptions to every rule. Like when you're a jewelry retailer, the transaction is above 2 lakh rupees,
Yeah.
right? That the law mandates. But I hope this gives everyone, a clearer perspective on that, right? I think there are some more questions which we'll clarify in a bit more,
Yeah.
right? But before that, I'll hand it back to Varun to talk a lot more about the rights that an individual customer as a data principal has under this law.
Yeah, a lot of interesting questions, of course, there, Pranav. But the idea of this webinar is to give everyone an idea that this is the common denominator that they need to implement across as a compliance mechanism to begin with. And in that regard, like I had mentioned, it is not just a one-time collection or a one-time automated deletion. It is very much an interactive portal. So retailers are required to enable a mechanism where the customer can also ask what is the information that you have taken and for what purpose that you're using. It allows for a customer to correct their data as well. So there was a good, interesting question about number portability if someone has changed their number. So this portal is supposed to allow for a customer to update their information with a consent manager so that it's updated across multiple platforms and forums. It should allow them to withdraw their consent also. It should allow them to ask for a deletion also. It goes to the extent of giving them information for how to nominate someone on their behalf to deal with this portal in case they are no more or they are incapacitated. And it's supposed to give them information about who they can reach out to on behalf of on the business side if they have any grievances or they need any redressal mechanism, right? And all of this, whenever there is an interaction with a customer requesting all of this, the law requires the business to act in a prompt manner, right? And so this then becomes a whole separate department of dealing with the customer. It's a whole separate vertical of interacting with the customer. So it's no more just about the sale or just about marketing. This is now about a separate vertical dealing with their information, right? And Pranav, I'll throw it back to you now as to what one can do to ensure that this interaction with the customer is seamless, is easy, and is not a pain for somebody to keep looking at it and monitoring it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So Just like, for example, in Xeno's product, we have a microsite, which is a customer facing portal that we have. The same way for consent, we need to have a customer facing portal, right? Now, this could be an independent portal. It could be embedded into a microsite that you have with Xeno. It could be on your website, right? But the core idea is, for all these rights that Varun spoke about, you will basically have a consent portal where customers can make all of these requests, right? So like here on the request center, you can see the request type erasure right now, right? So the customer can basically share that, hey, for the email ID name, this name, maybe this phone number, however we have set up our particular system. And of course, I will need to verify my details within OTP, because otherwise I could randomly make API calls and delete everyone's data. Through a request center, I can make requests to erase my data, to get more information around what is the type of consent I already have given you. I can choose to modify and update that consent, maybe not completely erase my consent, right? I can ask a question to which are the further systems with which you are sharing this data, right? And I can raise any other grievance through this consent portal, right? It is just a way for customers to have a conversation with you and interact with you, which is mandated by law to have this customer consent portal so that customers can have these conversations with us, right? You can see that they can even download, all the consent that they have to save it for their safekeeping, right? So this entire consent portal is basically a requirement that we have by law to make sure that we can service our customers and give us the rights that we are required to give them, right? As per the DPDP Act. Now, yes, we have a big number on the screen, and Varun, I'm going to hand it back to you to talk about these big numbers and what it
So,
entails.
for the benefit of everybody here, I just want to tell you that this is the first time in the history of this country where a regulator has been given this kind of power to levy these kind of fines. Okay. Up till now, all of you have, all of you, I'm assuming, are citizens of India. You have seen the kind of fines that the law gives the government power to implement. Traffic fines, 10,000 rupees. Labor law fines, 1 lakh, maybe maximum 2 lakhs. We have now had the new Indian Penal Code, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. The fines are in the range of 1 lakh, 2 lakh. Now you're seeing these numbers. 250 crores is the power that the Data Privacy Board has the power to levy. Now, it's logical. Once the government has the power to do something by law, it stands to reason that they will implement it. Why will they not use these powers? In fact, there's a schedule in the Act which lists out all of these what all penalties the government can impose on what kind of a breach. It could be the minorest of the smallest of infractions, and the minimum sort of penalty for that can go up to 50 crore rupees. So for a lot of you, maybe these numbers and fines and penalties might not be very much, but I want to bring to your attention 2 points. One is the power exists with the government. Once they have the power and the regulator is formed, they will make a few people a scapegoat. And once the board is set up and 17 months from now, when the act is implemented, they will catch a few people and implement these fines, even if it is just to make someone an example, right? I'm being very candid and open about how things work. Maybe complete blanket enforcement across all retailers will not be possible because the government also does not have those kind of resources, but be rest assured, they will make an example of a few. This we have already seen in the past with regulators such as the Competition Commission of India. They will catch you and implement a fine. Secondly, if you're a named business, the reputational hit of that is significant because a lot of you might be subsidiaries of listed companies, and there it would impact not only your stock price, it would have to be disclosed in your risk factors to investors. Every time there's a subsequent raising of funds, or it has to be disclosed to the stock exchange. So there is a significant reputational hit, even if you are under the scanner for non-compliance, right? So the numbers are big. The probability of enforcement is high. Each subsequent breach is a separate crime and is a separate penalty. So it can be compounded and it can become cumulative. So it can be multiple times this number, right? Of course, the law gives the government power to, it's quite an open discretion that the government has given the regulator. They can impose these fines. Obviously, they can look at the severity, the amount of losses to the general public, what is the gain that the business has made. All of those factors will be considered, but let's not forget that they have the power to impose and implement this, right? Uh, and if you are in investigation, it becomes extremely important that before it gets to the stage where your penalties are imposed, you are able to produce evidence of compliance, right? And that goes back to what Pranav was talking about, audit laws and everything. And that's why it's important to look at each of your systems currently, particularly in this sector. Like I mentioned, it's a high risk sector because there are multiple points of collection of personal data or multiple personal data touch points, as we call. There is your website, there's the point of sale, there are through loyalty apps, so many ways in which you are talking to your customer. You're a very customer focused business as opposed to say any other service sector industry, maybe more so even than mine, right? Today, consent storage is fragmented. There is no one place where you can get consent. There is no audit logs. How a customer is unsubscribing or withdrawing their consent is not logged. Even when they do, whether it's implemented, there is a delayed reaction to their wants. There is nothing today that allows for, I'm assuming, all of your customers to interact with their personal data and deal with them vis-a-vis you. So there is nothing between you and the customer. There is nobody streamlining this process for you. And once the act becomes effective, so to speak, non-compliance is non-compliance, even if it is on the first day. Because then the government will say that we had given you a period of 1.5 years almost to implement this. Now on day one, you cannot say that I need some more time, right? So immediate failures will also come under scrutiny. There should be no qualms about that, right? Pranav, if we can move forward. The best solution as a lawyer that one is expecting, right? And it might come through multiple sort of ways. There could be better solutions, faster solutions. But what are we essentially looking at in terms of the basic principles of what that solution should look like? Number one, it should be a single source of truth, as in there shouldn't be, multiple portals, multiple formats, right, which are not talking to each other. Single point of contact, the consent is coming through here and the customer is managing that data also through that one point of contact. There's a real-time sync, right? There shouldn't be a lag or a delay, especially in today's day and age where a technical solution allows for a real-time sync. These logs should be tamper-proof in the sense that you cannot go back and say, oh, we made the mistake, let me go and try and work to tamper this. You have to be able to prove to the government that there is some credibility to these logs. Okay. The customer is king, so you need to put this portal front and center in his face to let them know that this is what he can, these are the rights that he has, and this is what can be done. We have spoken about automated deletion. Don't think that if the customer doesn't say anything or withdraw the consent and the purpose is over, that the responsibility to delete automatically is not there. It is there. It is a compliance obligation. And of course, you operate in a dynamic environment in a country with over 8 official languages and hundreds of dialects. It's important for the customer to truly understand what he's signing up for. So you need to have a nimble enough system that you configure it to your different regions and different demographics. It has to be quick, it has to be fast, and all of this has to be sort of packaged into a unified, easily understandable mechanism, right? So this is the kind of ideal solution that we are looking for when we talk to software developers and technical solution providers like Pranav. We also tell him that, see, we don't know how this should look like. We don't know the coding behind it. We are not coders or software developers, but we know how a regulator will look at things. You need to, and the regulator is not a software engineer or a smart guy. He's a retired high court judge or a Supreme Court judge. So they have knowledge of what the law requirements are. Now it is for us as businesses and as lawyers to put it in front of them in plain vanilla. This is how I took the consent. This is for what the consent was taken. This is how I have used and processed the data. And this is how, these are the logs for all of that. And by the way, my logs are tamper proof. If you put that before any judicial officer or a retired IAS officer, whoever's on this data privacy board, who you're trying to prove that you're in compliance, it has to be as simple as that and as easy for them to understand. So that is what we tell that, this is the kind of solution that you need to implement and have in place. Pranav, we can move on, right? An important question has come about, and that's why we have a dedicated slide to deal with this. If you already have customer data and they have already given you their consent, it doesn't matter. Once this law comes into force, you need to send them a notice again. You need to reach out to all your customers again. You need to give them the kind of notice for their consent that this law requires. And then they can choose to withdraw their consent or give that consent, right? But if they don't respond at all, right? If they don't actively withdraw their consent and they ignore that notice, then you are grandfathered, or what we say, you are still allowed to continue to use their data. Okay, so that exception the law allows. But the law requires you to make one proper, honest effort to reach out to all your customers and seek their consent again, as per this law. Right? But it also has a little carve out which says if they don't respond or actively withdraw, you can continue using that data because you have previously taken their consent. All right. So that is how it is. But one expects that customers to get more savvy, to become better at understanding it. So whenever marketing material will reach them, they will also have knowledge of whatever consent management portal is being used. And so they might, choose to withdraw their consent. But the point is, you're supposed to, in the first instance, give them that notice. Pranav, can we move on?
Yeah.
Right. Now, before we end, the final sort of legal message I would want to give to you is that there are, in my experience, businesses have approached this in two ways. Some businesses have seen this as another headache, another compliance burden, another law that the government has come up with, and it is just going to increase their compliance costs and it's going to make life difficult because you need to hire somebody, you need to hire a vendor, you need to put into place a system. That's one category of businesses. The other category of businesses have seen this as an opportunity. They are saying that we want to be compliant and tell our customers, listen, you shop with us, you work with us, we have the best data privacy module in place, and we will ensure that your data is completely safe and robust. So they want to be the first mover so that they can use it as a branding tool. It is very similar to what Apple has done and differentiated itself. They've said that, unlike other software developers or hardware developers, your data privacy matters to us and we have got the best system in place. So businesses are viewing it from that standpoint and they're really actively taking steps to ensure that they have the best module in place for ensuring compliances. So brands that adopt early don't get shocked when 18 months come and the compliance is required. Brands are adopting early and they're putting it into their systems and processes already so that it's a very gradual move into this new regime. It is not a shock awakening, right? And if you comply sort of today, it ensures that your growth plans, your growth projections, none of that is hampered. Life continues to move on seamlessly. 18 months, the date will come and go also. It shouldn't impact you. It should be the fact that, you're already doing whatever the law required you to do and really show to your customers that this is a trust advantage that they have when they shop with you, right? Or work with you. So this is really the two ways in which you can probably take a look at it. I think we all know what the better way to look at it is. And so when something is inevitable, I think it's best to take steps in the right direction to uh, close it and be as compliant as one can be, right? Pranav, any closing thoughts?
No, thanks so much for everything, Varun. I can see everyone coming in with a lot of questions, people raising their hands. I know this is very new for all of us, and we're all looking to learn a lot more about this, right? And at the same point of time, is the reality probably the most asked question was by when do I have to implement this? The answer to that is 73 weeks from today, right? And we're literally at the end of the week. So 72 weeks from today, practically speaking, right? And by the time we enter the new year, it's going to be 70 weeks from then, right? And the time is kicking on, and it's so that's why it's something that we need to learn a lot about very quickly, figure out how we want to approach it as a business, then figure out how we want to implement it from a technology perspective, right? So one of the things, we're working with all of our customers on is to learn more and more about this. The webinar today was a part of that, right? If any of you are looking to learn more about what a technology solution can look like for you to actually solve this, you can let us know, and we'll be happy to help you learn even more about that. But at the core of it, right, the reality today is data privacy is going to change forever in India, and the way we work with customer data is going to change forever in India, right? And we're all going to undertake that journey together, and we're happy to help you along as you undertake that entire journey. Right now, we'll keep the poll up for a few more seconds before we wrap it up, right? But in the meantime, what we'll start doing is we'll quickly answer, some more of the questions that were basically getting asked today, because I can see quite a few of them coming in, right? And we might have answered some of them already, but in any case, I'll cover all of them. Right. So, Varun, there's a question from Renault, right, around customers gave us consent, but then they gave up that mobile number and another customer take that mobile number. So, is the company safe in that case?
The short answer is yes, the company is safe. Okay. Now, what would typically happen is what problem we always already face when you inherit someone's number that has already been in use. You are constantly contacted by old businesses. All right. Now, this business, right, would typically be interacting with its customers now through a consent manager, right? And if this did not come out very clearly through the webinar, the government recognizes a group of intermediaries or middlemen called consent managers whose job is only to do all of this, right? So there would exist a consent manager for the old person who held that phone number as well as for the new person, right? If he's interacting with any particular business, he would at some point in time registered with a consent manager, right? Typically, what would happen is that these consent managers would receive latest data from the telecom operator as to who this number is linked to, right? Or the old customer would have withdrawn their consent from on that portal vis-a-vis their number, right? Irrespective, each new customer who's receiving unwarranted marketing material has the option to withdraw their consent vis-a-vis that particular business, right? That has to be available or made available, right? And that is how we envisage the regime to move forward. Obviously, there will be some kinks in how this is implemented. But to answer your question, the business is safe because you see, what has the business done wrong? They have taken valid consent and they have specified the purpose for which it is being used, and you're within the 3-year window. The purpose is still pretty much active. And so, if you are then reaching out to a particular person as a business, you have not done anything which is non compliant. Yet, at the same time, everyone the business is interacting with or has that number through that number has got the option to withdraw their consent, right? Which I'm assuming the new person who has that number will also have the option to withdraw their consent through some consent manager or the other. So it is not that the business is non-compliant and consumers still have that right. So just like we ask whichever business has reached out to us that please delete my number, I'm no longer interested, and they do. And just like you go to your telecom operator and put yourself on a D&D list, similarly, customers will have the option to go to their consent manager and say that this number now belongs to this person, and I have withdrawn my consent prior to this date for any business prior to me receiving that number. So that solution will be there, but that is the headache of the consent manager and the consumer, not of the business. You will be compliant.
Perfect. And Varun, like, how does this affect us in a B2B environment? Like, let's say while working with other businesses, or let's say for employees, who are interested in applying for a role at our company.
Yeah. Right. Now, that's a very interesting question. A lot of personal data is collected by businesses, not through customers, but their own people, people who have reached out to them for a job opportunity or are currently working for the company, right? That is covered under legitimate use. So you do not need to seek such robust or active consent from them for use of their data. Typically, when a person is reaching out to you through a career portal, there would be a form of this consent saying that, we will take your data to run analytics to see what kind of role and position you fit within a company. So when a person is reaching out through a portal to apply for a job, that you will need to give this kind of a notice. But once they're a part of your company, retaining their data and dealing with their data is allowed under legitimate use. So you can do that because now they're part of your team, and at the and so their data then can be used and retained by an organization for a myriad of purposes. The laws quotes examples of protecting employment data, protecting trade secrets, protecting inside company information, vendor names, customer lists, all of that, and confidential business information. So once he's part of your team and already working in your organization, then you can deal with his personal data as you wish. It's protected under legitimate use. When someone is reaching out to you first time to apply for a job, you will have to give such a notice because you are then collecting personal information. I hope that answers.
No, perfect. The next question is around if transactions above a certain value mandate sharing a PAN card.
Yeah.
So then am I allowed to keep that PAN card?
You are so the idea is no, a PAN card is personal information for which would follow the same principles of deletion. You are not required to keep a PAN card beyond what is your audit requirement purposes, right? So you would be audited in that particular year. Your auditor would ask for what transactions took place. You would show the transactions, you would show the invoice. That period is 1 year, one financial year. Beyond that, the statutory law also doesn't require you to hold on to that PAN card information, so you would delete it. So the principle is that you have to delete it. The only thing that will allow you to retain it is some other law requiring you to retain it. To my mind, the only other law requiring you to retain it would be under the Income Tax Act, information that is required for the purposes of your statutory audit. And that usually has a cycle of one financial year. So the answer is no, you cannot retain it indefinitely. You would retain it only for the period which is required for the statutory audit, right?
No, thank
Or
you.
yeah, or whatever if the purpose is continuing, then you retain it, whichever is later, the 3 year period or the 1 year audit cycle period.
Got it. And Varun, the next question is around, is consent collection, modification, deletion, is it mandated by the law that it has to be available across digital touch points to a customer, like the POS, a website, an app? Like, is there a singular place or does it have to be at every touch point?
Well, the law specifically says that the consent given by the data principal has to be free, specific, informed, unconditional, ambiguous, and a clear affirmative action. Now, you decide how you want to get that. You can get it through a POS, one place, you can get it through a mobile phone. You be as creative as you want to be, and you can, without harassing the customer, get it in whatever manner. That is for the business to be creative. Law is very clear. Get it in these parameters.
Yeah.
So
But
the answer is no, it doesn't have to be multiple, but there's nothing stopping from it being multiple as well. But just get it. Get it
yeah.
however is the whatever way will get you all of these checkpoints to be ticked.
Yeah, but I think what the industry has also aligned on as a singular solution is having a consent management platform that can manage this singularly so that it's
Yeah,
practically easy to do on ground, but that is not a mandate by the law per se.
yeah.
That
I
is a
think we have.
solution to what the law
Yeah.
requests.
Yeah, we have so one of our clients is H&M, and I can disclose this because they have it's in the public domain. So H&M has implemented the system. They obviously have onboarded a consent manager who's going to get registered, but they have a technology partner in place. And they have implemented at the point of sale for their brick and mortar stores. They have a screen like the one that you had shown, where you tick, 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 tick on a touch screen and you do that. So that's the kind of implementation method that they have. They did their cost benefit analysis. They said, okay, 15 to 20,000 rupees a screen, 6 screens to a store, 55 stores. This is the cost to it. They did it and they did it. It's just easier for them. So that's how it is.
Got it.
Yeah.
The next question is around if a customer asks for deletion or after expiry, can one keep track of when the consent was given by this customer and when the deletion happens? In the CMP, will the number still be there to keep the details? Like, how will we track the process after the deletion or the expiry has happened in case somebody questions us later?
So that is where the solution that you mentioned, Pranav, comes in. That's where the audit trail and the audit log would come in, wherein the specific data being dealt with is not mentioned, but the fact that this particular data was dealt with is mentioned, right? So the audit log looks very different from the actual personal data. So that audit log would have to be retained, yes, to show and prove that the consent and compliance was done.
Understood. Then there is another question. So Try has a capability called as DND, right? And you cannot
Yes.
send a SMS communication to customers that are on DND. So does this consent overpower DND or do they work as independent solutions?
It's a very, very good question. And today, honestly, nobody has the answer. Even I don't know whether it overrides or not. My legal opinion on this would be yes, it overrides. Why? Because the quality and nature of the consent is much more robust. And the law says when there is a specific law on a particular subject, the general law overrides. It overrides the general law. And TRI does this DND as a part of a government policy, not as a part of a law. So now there is a specific law. And if a person under that law does any act, that law will override any government policy and generally be more considered to be more qualitative and more specific. So my legal opinion on this would be that this consent under this act, consent or no consent, withdrawal or whatever, the actions under this act will override whatever this general DND try policy was.
Perfect. The next question, right, is around how you once said without consent you can't do anything. Consent needs to be explicit. But then for historical data, Varun, you shared that we just send a notice and if the customer doesn't reply, we can communicate to them. So both of these two things
Yeah.
are different, right? So if you can clarify that a bit more so that there's no confusion around how it's gonna work before and after.
So very specifically, the law says where a data principal has given her consent for the processing of her personal data before the commencement of the act. So somebody has already given their consent before the commencement of the act. That's the only scenario that they are expecting, right? The law addresses. So somebody has given their consent for processing of their personal data under the old law, which was the IT Act. Okay. And the rules made thereunder. So they have given their consent. Now the new law has come into force. The government is saying, okay, now what to do with that? So they say you give another consent. Okay. But if they don't specifically withdraw, you can continue to use their data. Okay. But the new law, you can continue to use their data, but the new law's principles with regards to purpose still being there or not, and the timeline for deletion if the purpose is not being fulfilled or the information is no longer used still applies. So that clarifies?
Yeah, so Varun, if I had to clarify that a little
Yeah.
further,
Yeah.
right? What you are saying is, let's say you have to delete the data after 3 years,
Yeah.
right? So even then, the data that you can use of customers is only customers that transacted with us in the last 3 years, not customers that transacted with us before that, because that's the
Yes.
system we're following now.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly what I'm saying. That under the new law, you'll have to give a notice again. If they keep quiet and they don't give that notice and they don't even withdraw, then your 3 year window is started.
Understood. And on day zero, the 3 year window, because somebody
Yes.
could have given their consent or made a transaction with us 2 years and 300 days ago. So after 65 days, their consent will expire,
Yes.
even if
Correct.
they did not voluntarily expire it.
Yes, even if they did not actively withdraw it, that 3 year ticking time bomb has started for their information. Correct.
Understood. Yes. The next question is, how can one raise a legal complaint against a company on a DPDP Act? Like, how is raising a complaint going to work?
So first of all, when you take the consent, you have to provide them the mechanism by which they can raise a complaint, both with the company, if they want to, for grievance redressal, you have to give them that mechanism first. But you also have to tell them what are their rights for raising a complaint with the Data Protection Board, right? You would typically write to the Data Protection Board and you would raise a complaint through whatever mechanism and portal they will implement now, right? Typically, that would be, I think, by way of email or they would have their own portal, whatever. But it's important that whenever there is a data breach, right, or there has been a non-compliance with this act, the responsibility of the business is for themselves to go to the government and tell them that there has been a non-compliance and there has been a data breach. So you are supposed to go to the government yourself. Businesses are supposed to go tell them yourself, right? General consumers like you and me can write to the Data Protection Board. Writing can be through either email or through a portal that they will set up.
Understood.
And then they
And
can take action.
Varun, just two last questions, right? What about supplier data, the B2B suppliers that we have?
So I don't know how much personal data would there be for suppliers, right? But if a supplier is providing personal data to interact with another business, then the same principles apply. If it is personal data and it is in a digital form, then you have to tell them that you are a supplier to us. We are taking this personal data and we will use it for this particular purpose. It doesn't change. Now, the mechanism for dealing with suppliers can be bifurcated as opposed to customers. So you can have suppliers click a different portal link or whatever and take them to a different page. But essentially, the principles remain the same and it's no different. Don't think that if it's in a B2B environment, these laws don't apply. They apply in a B2B environment also, as well as in a B2C environment. Though it is meant more for the B2C environment to protect the common man. Even your supplier, if his personal data is going, he's also a common man for the purposes of this law.
Perfect, Varun. And if a SaaS vendor is processing, a
Yeah.
data as a data processor and is storing the logs or the backups of a data principal's data outside India, how will the liability be viewed under DPDP?
No, this is a very good question again. This SaaS processor is given a term under the law. He's a data processor. The data processor and the data fiduciary, which is you, the business, have entered into a contract. You need to, by law, enter into a contract now. This relationship-based verbal thing will not work. The law requires anybody you are giving personal data to for the purposes of processing to have a contract. Number one. Number two, this law has extraterritorial application. So if somebody is processing data outside India, but that data pertains to Indians or pertains to goods and services being supplied in India, this law applies to you as that business. You are supposed to ensure compliance with regards to that data process. So you will be held liable.
Understood. So we have to ensure that the data processor is
Yes.
also keeping the data
Yes.
within India under the regulations of the law.
Yes. Just to correct you, he is not supposed to keep the data within India. He is just supposed to ensure that the data the law is being complied with wherever the data
Understood.
is. So there is no data localization requirement. It is
Understood.
just that the data fiduciary, which is the retailer business, he is responsible for the actions of the data processor. So the data processor could be sitting in Amsterdam or in New York, but the government will not catch them. They will catch you sitting in India saying you were supposed to ensure that they complied with the law.
Very clear, Varun. The last question that we have before we wrap up is, if a business wants longer retention, but the original purpose is complete, how should an organization decide on retention versus deletion?
Sorry, I'm sorry. Nothing can be done. Generate the purpose, engage with your customer, get him to buy something more, ask him again. That's the only way. If he is completely been dead for 3 years and you have had no interaction with them, then I'm sorry, there's nothing you can do to continue to retain his data.
No.
Just before
Perfect.
that 3 years is about to expire, you have to give that 48-hour notice. Make that 48-hour notice so impulsive that the person feels that he's going to lose out on something if he doesn't respond to that. Do something. That's creative businessing. Na? Use whatever marketing tool, call him for a lunch, call him for an event. but get his consent, get him to engage with the business again. If for 3 years as a business you have not been able to engage with your customer, and then suddenly you want some more time to retain his data, then I'm sorry, you need to as a business be more smart, for lack of a better word.
No, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Varun. Thank you so much for your time to join us for this conversation today and share all the insights. I think it was really, really useful. Um, right. And thank you so much, everyone who's attending. I know we're well over time, almost 30 minutes over time, and over 50 of you are still here, even though we're so over time. Right. So thank you so much for spending the time with us, and it was great to have this session with all of you. Thank
Thank
you,
you
and
so
have
much.
a great afternoon.
Yes, thank you, Pranav. Just a closing thought. It's very important for the industry to come together. So legal experts like myself, as well as technology experts such as yourself, to really help businesses transition into this new phase. I think we really need to ensure that India comes across as one jurisdiction where consumer data is not taken flippantly. And I think it requires more such sessions. But I'm really happy that you came up with this endeavor and happy to help and contribute. And thank you everyone for staying with us for 1.5 hours.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.